snuck up on us here. So it's time to call to order the City Commission study session for Monday, February 13th. And I don't know if I need to look at Mr. Scragg or if Debbie Pack's going to take over. So.
Debbie and her staff and the city manager's office have been having these conversations quite a bit, but I'll turn it over to her to make the presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Debbie Pack, Director of Finance. Today's study session is a preliminary financial update for 2022. And for once since I've been here, it's better news than not, so that's a good thing. So we're just going to go over kind of how the funds ended up. Now, this is preliminary. We haven't had our audit. Also, we're still trying to finalize some of the numbers that we're working at, doing some reconciliations. But I just wanted to give you these numbers as we get started on 2023, especially as we get into strategic planning and things like that. There might be just some decisions that you all need to make as far as fund balances and things like that. So I wanted to try to at least get these numbers out there so you had an idea what was coming. So overall, the 2022 top general fund revenues by type did not change much from the prior year. We still have sales tax, property tax, franchise fees as our top three. And you can see that those are about 60–70% of our revenues that we collect in the general fund. And then if you look at the slide 3, I broke that out about to try to look at what are the most revenues. So 85+% of our revenue come from 5 revenue sources, and that's sales and use tax, property tax, franchise fees, interfund service transfers, and EMS. So you can see just those 5 out of our 15 or so categories that we do have are over 85% of our revenue. So we're very concentrated on those numbers.
Debbie, for the public, could you explain what interfund transfer revenue is?
There's a couple of things there. There are some enterprise funds that we support as the general fund, and this is general fund revenue. So, for example, if we provide computer technology to an enterprise fund, we charge them a certain fee every year. Overhead fees for payroll, HR, finance, city manager, direction. So some of those are the fees that we charge to those enterprise fees for the assistance that we give them out of the general fund.
And it flows back into the general fund.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. So a comparison from 2021 to 2022 as far as the revenues. As you can see, sales and use tax went up significantly. We'll look at those numbers a little bit later. And most of these top ones we'll look at it a little bit later. Property tax, one of the things that might stick out to you is that it went down. But as you recall, well, you might recall or might not, when we did the 2022 budget, we went back to the revenue neutral rate, which lowered our revenues just a little bit. Remember, we had this conversation. It kind of gets confusing about what year we're in. But for the 2022 budget, that was the first year that revenue neutral rate went into effect. And you all chose not to go with that rate because it wasn't going to have that big an impact on our actual finances. It was about $80,000 or $90,000 swing, so that's why that number looks a little bit less. The other numbers are franchise fees fees went up a little bit. Others that might stick out are other revenues. In 2022, that would have included the SMC settlement, so there was about $160,000 or $70,000 in that settlement that made that off a little bit. And in investment income, that's a direct correlation to a higher interest rates that we're receiving on some of our funding now. So now we'll take a little deeper look at some of those top revenues that we looked at. The next slide is
go back just a minute. I was surprised at the number for municipal court.
That it's lowered now. I will say that's probably a reflection of how a couple of things, and Mike can step in because he talks to them more often than I do. But COVID brought in a lot of money because people were paying and things like that. I believe the caseload, how they're feeing cases.
Yeah, both in terms of the bond approach. One thing that we implemented is kind of our collection approach, so that we might have seen a bit of a spike in 2021 because of altering our approach to collections. But in terms of activity, their focus has been more on bonding out on your own recognizance versus a paid bond, which doesn't necessarily impact their revenue, but their volume does fluctuate a little bit. from year
I
to
guess
year.
I was surprised it was that high in general.
Oh, actually, I think it's trending downward.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we thought your concern was
People are
the reverse
obeying
of
the
that.
speed limit.
Yeah, maybe. Any other questions? And I don't know if we cover that one specifically when we get into the detail or not, but I can certainly look at that. But it has been trending down since probably in the last 5 years, so we can look at that later. So sales tax, obviously, has had the highest jump for us in our revenue. It's about a 10% jump over 2022. And as you can see, it's for every month, almost every month in 2022, we collected more than we did in any prior year in the past 5 years. Breaking that down into retail or into sales, and where does that information or where does that money come from? As you can see, the blue on the next slide is the retail, which is the largest by far source of our revenue in sales tax, followed by accommodations and food services, utilities, and information. And you can see that all of those categories grew just a little bit in 2022, making that number grow so far as we have in 2022. The next slide provides you a breakdown of the retail section. So that dark blue section on that slide is now broken down into what types of retail providers those numbers are coming from. And you can see that automobile dealers have by far always been one of our highest sellers for sales tax, followed by department stores. And I will say the categories are a little bit confusing because we might think of a department store as a JCPenney's or a Sears, but how these are categorized comes straight from the business and how they categorize themselves. So in department stores, you might see Walmart or you might see Target. Not that I know specifically that they're in there, but my guess is they're probably in the department store section. And it's just how they categorize themselves as far as having multiple departments that they sell goods out of.
And I think I've asked this before, but sales tax on automobiles, it's not where the car is sold, it's where it's licensed. Is that correct? Where it's tagged?
That is a really good question, and it's a complicated answer that Debbie's been working on quite a bit. But
Yeah, so if you buy, and I'm losing track of what it is right now, but if you buy a car in a state outside of Kansas, when you come back to Kansas, you will pay the difference between what you paid and what you paid there in Kansas. If you buy it in Kansas, then you'll pay the rate at where you bought it, and then when you go back to your jurisdiction, you'll pay the difference between your jurisdiction and Salina County's jurisdiction. So it is very confusing.
So if
Vice versa?
and vice
And
versa.
vice versa.
So
Yeah.
if someone from Reno County buys a car in Salina, we'll receive ours, and then what if the tax is lower in that county?
It doesn't matter. They still pay what's in Salina County, the higher of the two.
Right, so we don't have to rebate anything if it's lower, so we do
Right.
collect it. Okay.
Right.
I don't know why I was thinking it was just you collected the tax on the county where it got tagged, so
Yeah, we used to think that too, but like I said,
maybe.
that's a complicated issue.
Okay.
Because people buy cars and they go to the tag office and they're paying sales tax and it makes no sense to them.
Right.
So it is a calculation about what you paid, the difference between what you paid
So if it's
and what you should have paid in your home county.
So if it's 9% in another county and ours is 9.25%, then we pay that 0.25%.
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
Great. So the next highest, and then is the department stores, and then grocery stores would be our next highest. Then building materials is our next one, and the rest of them kind of dwindle off as you get a little bit deeper into the weeds as far as retail types of businesses on that particular one. And this is an 85% of our sales, so that's where 85% of our sales tax is coming from. Now, we've talked about the difference between use tax and sales tax quite often. Use tax is when you buy something that you're not buying in your town, so you're buying for the the use of it. So for example, if you buy online or if you would buy out of state and you had to pay tax, that would be use tax if it was submitted to the state of Kansas. And the reason we're seeing this number go up is because the state of Kansas has implemented some better collection. They collect all this from your big salespeople online, whether you're buying from Chewy.com or Amazon or wherever. The state collects that and then sends it to the jurisdiction at which you live. So if you live in Salina, that use tax is coming back to the city of Salina because it's where the use of the property is.
Yeah, they transitioned from you only paid taxes for businesses that had a brick and mortar location in the state to just all transactions on the internet are subject to sales tax.
And that's all transactions, no matter how large the corporation is or anything.
Right.
I think there are some limitations
When
as
there's
far
some-
as how much a corporation sells. I think
Right.
it's a $200,000 cap or something like that, if I remember right. I know that was the number at first. I'm not sure if that's gone down at this
Okay.
point. You do see a big dip in here in this graph in October, and you didn't see it as much in sales tax because it's just a larger number, so it's spread out a little bit. But that was a timing issue with collections and distribution to subdivisions, so that kind of levels itself out once you get into November, and so you can see September was very high. So they collected a little bit and distributed it a little bit earlier than what normally would have happened. So what we do is we try to, as we go along every month, we try to look at these things to see if there's something that's causing it. For example, if we had some taxpayer that was highly delinquent, we all of a sudden got a lot of money, we'd want to know that because that's not a normal thing to us. So what we're trying to figure out is where our norm's going to end up. And so as these things dip and flow, we try to take a look at those numbers to see if there's a specific situation that's causing that to happen. And if we don't do it, then Mike asks us and we have to look it up anyway because he'll notice it and ask us. But we do try to keep a handle on that. For the public's information, all of this information that I'm providing you, the sales tax information, monthly financial reports are on the website. We try to get them out there monthly. We're kind of behind sometimes because depending on the timing, but we do try to get those out there monthly. So if anybody's ever interested in where we are in a specific month, they can go out to the website under the finance department. And there's some reports, financial reports out there that all of this information for last year's out there by month. So if they wanted to look at anything specific. The next slide is a breakdown of sales and use tax, the city side sales and use tax. Well, it's city and county. So basically what this is showing you is the darker green on the bottom is the city's half-cent sales tax. The larger next lighter green portion is the city's portion of the county sales tax, which is about 60% of the county sales tax. That's dependent on population and tax levying of property tax. It's a calculation that's done every 6 months. So every 6 months we get a new number, what that is. But we typically fall right around the 60% mark. And then the special purpose is the 0.75 that we renewed in 2016. It's a little bit larger in that light blue at the top. Just something to note, through December, our sales and use tax was up about 8.26% over 2021, which equated to about $1.4 million. And the city's portion of the countywide sales tax was up about 9.6%, or about $834,000. So that's where we're seeing a high increase of our revenue in the general fund. The next category we'll look at is property tax. We show these a lot, these property tax, but one of the things I wanted to show on the top one is what we budgeted compared to what we collected in 2021. Not sure why I don't have 2022 on there, but anyway, we're pretty good at budgeting what we're going to collect. There's a little bit of unknown. The unknown factor is if we have rebates that are coming out of there that we haven't accounted for in our budgeting cycle, or if we have delinquencies. And delinquency rates are typically fairly low, 1% to 2%. But what I wanted to also show on this is as we've gotten more rebates, especially in 2020, you'll see a big spike in that NRA. NRA is a Neighborhood Revitalization Act. which allows businesses or properties to get a tax rebate on improvements to properties. We added Foley in 2020, which was a fairly large NRA for us. So that sometimes will affect how we budget, how our revenue and budget and actual numbers come out. And at the bottom, I just wanted to present to you again kind of where our valuations have gone. You can see it went up in 2022. However, we did lower our mill rate, as I mentioned, to the revenue neutral rate. So we went from 30.65 to 30.452 in 2022. Franchise fees, these are a little bit harder to determine kind of why they're doing what they're doing. As you can see, we've had a huge spike in franchise fees in both gas and electric. Typically, these are associated with weather. If you can imagine, electric bills are higher in the summer when it's hot, and gas bills are higher in the winter when it's cold. We have had some activity on the electric side with the merger of Evergy a couple of years ago, so we're not exactly sure where the rates and rebates and things like that are going. But our thought was that those rates should be going down, not up. So, you know, like I said, it's kind of hard to know unless you know specific guidelines of where rates are to determine what is affecting that number. But we know weather is a huge factor in that number. You can see the other ones, cable, phone, video, wireless, they're flat. They're not related to anything like weather. They're more related to when people buy things like video and cable. So those numbers are fairly flat overall. The next category, this isn't general fund category, but this is something that we've been talking about a lot, is transient guest tax. As you remember, back in October of 2021, we raised our transient guest tax to 7.75 from 6.7. That was about a 15.6% increase. And so we anticipated that our numbers were going to go up. So what I did on this top graph was I showed you what the numbers were in the second from the left column with that rate increase, and the column on the very right of that bar chart there shows you without that. So we're still ahead. We're still ahead of where we were in 2019, just not as much. But you can see the effect that raise really had on the collection of those funds. Our current collection is about 23% over in 2022 over 2019. The bottom graph, what I wanted to show you is where those transient guest tax went. We know it goes to the Salina Chamber of Commerce. That for their operations, they get 3 point over that 7.75%. The car marketing, which is like a local marketing for them, for local businesses, is 0.5. The Oakdale TPEC marketing is 0.2. TPEC operations is 2.0 of that 7.75. TPEC debt is 1% of the 7.75, and then the 1.05 is what we've set aside for park improvements. I did want to note that even though we have an allocation for TPEC debt, it's not paying for the TPEC debt, so I don't want people to assume that that's enough to pay all of the debt that we've done for the improvements of TPEC. The current debt payments in 2023 will be about $1 million, and we're setting aside about $301,000 from transient guest tax. The rest of that comes from property tax. Any questions on any of those so far? Transient guest tax? I know that one's a little... Okay. Anytime, just stop me if you have questions. Gas tax is the next one we'll look at. This one is kind of deceiving because it looks like 2021 was a huge jump, and it was. However, we did have what I call an off-cycle payment, which from the Department of Revenue was kind of a one-off. They did a distribution for a catch-up number or something like that. So it wasn't a normal quarterly payment. It was an additional payment, and that was about $103,000. So if we take that off the total, we'd be about right where we are, just a little bit under 2021 with the 2022 collection. But we're still higher than 2020.
And that tax does not go up with the price of fuel,
No, it
correct?
does not. It's based on the usage, so it's based on the number of gallons purchased. So inadvertently, it could if the price of gas goes up and that causes people not to travel with gas-utilizing vehicles. That could, but it's not related to the cost at all. It's not like a sales tax based on the sale price. It's based on the usage, so the number of gallons that are being used.
So on a gallon of gas, how much city tax comes out of that, do you know?
I was going to look that up.
Well, and just as a clarification, it's a state distribution of their tax.
Yeah, it's not. It's
So-
on there's a certain amount that goes on the gallon, and then the state gets part of it, we get part of it. So it's not that direct, if I could answer that way. Michael, look it up while we keep talking.
I'll see if I can.
I want to say it was like 20, but I don't know for sure. So that gets us through our revenue.
It's 24 cents.
24 cents, thank you. Whoever said that. See, I knew it was about 20. So that kind of gets us through our deep dive on our revenues, what they've been doing in 2022 as compared to previous years. Now we're going to go through our funds to kind of see where they ended up and where we anticipate that they'll end up in 2022.
Going back to the gas tax, those dollars have to be used for certain projects, correct?
That's correct. They have to be used for transportation,
Right.
streets. They can be used for sidewalks, trails, anything that allows transportation within the city.
And then you may recall from our budgeting and allocations, we talk about street projects, we have that, we have some federal funds, we have their exchange program, so we kind of segregate all those funds in terms of their sources and eligible uses.
Yep. So the first fund, which is our biggest fund by far, is general fund, provides all the operations for the city with the exception of the enterprise funds. Police, fire, parks, all of those services are provided out of the general fund. 2022, we budgeted $45 million in revenue. We actually received about $48 million in revenue, which is about a $3 million difference. You can see the majority of that comes in sales and use tax, which is about $2.4 million. We were over budget. And the next largest amount comes by far in franchise fees, which was almost $800,000 over budget. And on the expenditure side, we budgeted about a little over $45 million. And we realized about $42.8 million, which there again is about a $2.2 million under budget number. And if you add those two together, it seems odd, but you add those two together and that creates about a $5.2 million net income. We budgeted a $25,000 net income. So you can see with the realization of those huge income sources and the savings that we had in our expenditures, that created a $5.2 million net income for the general fund. The general fund ending fund balance at the end of 21 was about $18.5 million. With this anticipated increase in that fund balance, we anticipate that the general fund balance at the end of 22 will be about $23.8 million. Our target for that fund is $10 million. I don't think there's anything, or were there any questions specific to that, to the general fund that you had as you looked at these numbers, other than it's quite surprising?
Yeah, I just think back to pre-COVID, I think we were a little over 7 million in our
Yes.
general reserve fund balance, and we had that target balance at 10, and we just never seemed to be making many strides to that, so.
Right.
So,
And part of our strategic planning conversation will be what assumptions do we want to rely on going forward in terms of performance, and especially on the revenue side that can then kind of inform. And you've heard me say this before, but I think we've got two conversations. We've got expenditures that you might want to consider out of reserves, and then we've got annual ongoing commitments that would come out of the annual budget. So we're trying to frame that conversation for you in anticipation of having quite a bit to talk about.
I wanted to clarify this, ending fund balance, 23.7 million. That is considered the general reserve fund.
Yes.
Okay, and
It's
the
the fund-
target is 10 million.
Right.
Well, and we might touch on ARPA and the receipt of ARPA funds and how we accounted for those as well.
We received ARPA funds, about $3.5 million, because what we had to do for COVID was we had to determine in the years prior to COVID what our revenue would have been and then what effect COVID had. So that allowed us that difference, or the reduction in that revenue for that particular year gave us that window of about $3.5 million that we were able to get from COVID. That is not in this fund. That is in a separate fund being saved for those specific items that you have designated for use of those funds. We did have several last year in the strategic planning of things that we did take out of general fund. Most of those were back house items, agenda management software, the pay plan, things like that, that we had set aside out of the general fund balance. But it wasn't part of this, it wasn't part of the ARPA money, but those have been, most of those have come out of there. I would say the only one that's probably not out of there at this point is agenda management. And I can't think of anything else, do you remember, that we haven't already done out of those funds. Does that answer yours?
When we budgeted last year, and again, this will be part of what we do at strategic planning, how close to full employment at the city did we budget? Because I think right now we're probably, 15% below our total.
Yeah, we tried to include a vacancy factor in there. We didn't budget it full employment, but that is an ongoing conversation that we have in terms of, especially with the pay plan, we didn't know what to expect in terms of whether that increased our prospects in terms of full staffing. But we'll take another look at it as we put this upcoming budget together.
I'm going to say off the top of my head, overall, it was about 7% vacancy, but what we tried to evaluate is, because we know certain departments and positions are more vacant than other positions, we tried to look at that on a more granular level where we could look at, okay, for example, sanitation workers or police officers or something like that. Those positions that have more vacancies historically, we tried to look at those and be more realistic about, okay, those are the positions that we need to show as vacancies, not a 7% of the finance department, because my turnover may not be as high as some of those other departments. So to say a percentage, it's really hard to say what it is
But
overall.
I mean, if you look at what we anticipate would be full employment versus where we're at, it's in that, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think one thing worth noting is if you look at the 2022 budget, the budgeted revenue and the budgeted expenditures are nearly identical. And then our expenditure out of personnel is at that 98% range on the personnel side. Employee benefits can vary depending on what the employees elect in the way of coverage. But as you go through each one of those line items, they vary in terms of how much we spent out of the intended budget, but there's no individual one that jumps out like sales tax does on the revenue side.
Right. So next fund we'll look at is arts and humanities. This one we budgeted $1.8 million in revenue. We recognized $894,000. I will note that in our budget, we budgeted a $645,000 transfer. We only made a partial transfer, and the reasoning kind of behind that was we wanted to get them back up to their target fund balance. So we did do a transfer of $520,000 so that I don't want it to look like they didn't meet their expectations, because they certainly, on the revenue side, were a little bit higher than what we expected, and then on the expense side, where they were lower than what we expected. So from their perspective, they did a good job of not going over their budget and maximizing their revenue budget. What made the difference is that transfer. That transfer comes from the general fund. So we left a portion of that, $125,000 in the general fund, to be used for more general purposes, and then just transferred what we needed to do to get them to their target fund balance. The sales tax capital fund is the next one, and this has the same effect that the general fund is. We're about a $1.4 million over in revenue because of the sales tax increases. We're about we're only under budget about $61,000. So this fund balance went from $8.2 million to $7.45. And what you'll remember is there's a $10 million transfer out of here. And if you recall, we transferred funds for the River Festival, or the River Renewal Project, which was being held in this fund. And we felt like because it was being held in this fund, there was more likely chance that we get spent on something we didn't indicate. So we transferred money out for that. We also transferred money out for unused funding from prior years. We created the reserve capital accounts for vehicles and equipment, for streets, for parks maintenance, for fleet management, and for buildings and facilities. So any of those unused funds that we had prior to 2021 were transferred out of this 2022, actually out of 2022 budget. So that's why that $10 million transfer is large compared to what we've done in the past years. So in the future, what you'll see in 2023 is it'll be more closely aligned to what we typically do, our $500,000 or more, a little bit more, whatever we decide for capital improvement, or 3.2 whatever million dollars for streets. It'll be those numbers again. This was just a one-time, let's get it all where it needs to be, and then we'll we'll get back to our normal allocations for that. And all that money then is being held in an account specific for the purpose that we have deemed used for, so that if streets doesn't spend all their money, it doesn't come to the next year and we all of a sudden decide we're going to spend it on parks, so that streets then can have that money set aside. So if that, I don't know if you all remember that conversation, but that's kind of why this fund is doing what it's doing at this point. The next one is the Sales Tax Economic Development Fund, too. It had a little bit more sales tax revenue than we anticipated, about $57,000. We actually also did a transfer into this fund from the general fund to replenish it, because as you recall, we did have an economic development incentive to Schwann's. So when we looked at this for the 2022 budget, this was one of the general fund items that we took into account to replenish this. You see at 2021, the fund balance was $97,000. At the end of 2022, it's $897,000. And also, if you look at the normal kind of fees that are coming out of here, we made about $423,000 in 2022, and we paid out $373,000, and that's for SCEDO and SDI. So there's not a widespread there. There's a little bit, but it's not going to build up exponentially very fast without that transfer.
So the $400,000 we just approved for the Airport Authority project comes out of this?
Yes, it does.
Yep. So essentially, we transferred $750 in and then spent $400 back
Right.
out shortly thereafter.
And we might add $30,000 or $40,000, maybe $50,000 a year if numbers keep going up in sales tax. And obviously, they'll probably go up in the other expenses too, because things aren't stagnant as far as expenditures go either. So the next couple of funds I only put in here. What I didn't do is I tried not to put in funds that were just in and out funds, because I think as long as those funds are, all the money's coming in, all the money's going out, they're not as important to your knowledge. We'll report those all in our final numbers. But the tourism fund, we did amend this fund because we did have some things going in and out of here. This is money that goes out into TPAC, and it also goes out into the chamber. So this is our transient guest money that's coming in. And then on Tony's Pizza, we also had some kind of anomalies in here. We had that capital improvement that the Spectra gave us the money for that we actually spent in 2022. So those numbers are in here, and that was one of the reasons we had to amend this. So in that fund, after the capital expenditure reserve, it's got about $63,000 in it. The next slide is for parks. So what I tried to do on this slide is combine all of the sources of park revenue outside of the general fund revenue. So we have the special parks and recreation, which comes from 1/3 of the alcohol tax. You can see the alcohol tax was higher than we anticipated by about $85,000. Parks spent about $81,000 out of here, leaving the fund balance of about $423,000. Also, the Neighborhood Park Development Fund is a pretty small fund, but it's based on mortgage registrations. There's a fee for that we put into this fund, and it's geared to be spent back in that district where the mortgage was in, so that it kind of, your money gets spent where we got the money from. Parks did have a project this year that they did of $12,000. That left the fund balance in there about $46,000. And then I also added that capital maintenance reserve fund that I talked about earlier, about where we transferred those funds into those specific spending funds out of sales tax. So the revenue out of this will always be the sales tax transfer, and then the actual expenditures are what they're spending on the parks maintenance list, or whatever those amounts are that we approved for them out of that parks maintenance.
I thought I saw that in here. Maybe it was on a different report. We're collecting that extra, basically 1% to help turf Bill Burke.
That's in the transient guest tax
Right,
side.
and it came out of transient guest tax. What's that? I thought I saw somewhere where that balance was, reserve
It
balance.
is
I think
actually
she's
on,
getting to it.
Did I?
Slide 17.
That's why I said, yeah. Where did I?
On the, sorry, I should have said this.
Yeah.
In the fund balance there, you'll see that I put a line that
Reserve
says
for
it's
turf.
reserved
I
for
knew I
turf.
saw it, and you didn't hit it. Okay,
Right.
yeah.
I wanted to pull that out so you know where we stood right now.
And we're keeping that in a separate fund, and that's getting added to every quarter, so.
It's staying in the transient guest fund, but that's the only thing in there because everything
Right.
else really washes out. But yes, we're setting that aside, and theoretically, what we can do with that money is we can either reduce our debt when we go to actually debt finance what we've promised to do so, or we could use that to pay debt, whichever we choose to do at that moment.
So we've got a combination of a cash contribution to the project, and then the
Right, $1.5 million
transient guest tax.
cash, $2.5 million we were gonna debt finance.
Right.
As well.
And
Yeah.
as the project as we're doing this project and paying with cash, and then we work on the rest of that scope, that kind of buys us some time for this balance to build up.
Right.
And I don't, maybe it was a different report I saw somewhere, but aren't we collecting about 80,000 plus a quarter that goes into that debt service, into that?
Yeah, I don't know.
Wasn't that somewhere? And did I?
Yes, it was on the transient guest slide, I believe. I
Yeah.
don't know if it's, yeah. I don't think it shows that one in particular, though, but it is about $80,000. It was about $300,000 in 2022. So it was about 317,000 because it began in October. We wouldn't have received that until 2022.
Yeah, because in my
'Cause
head,
it's
I kind of
quarterly.
calculated, like you said, we might only have to debt service $2 million by the time we get the project done and it goes out for
Right,
bonding, so.
Right. That's true. So that gets us through parks. Any questions on that? Okay, so then special gas tax, we kind of talked about this one, so I won't spend a lot of time. The other revenue in here is the federal fund exchange dollars that Mike mentioned earlier, is where we get a percentage from the state for that. The fund balance in here is about $1.8 million. The fund balance in their capital reserve, which is where we're transferring funds, is about $77,000. And then the next slide I just gave you, they don't have any individual funds that are funding them, but these are the other capital reserve funds that we set up. Building facilities has about $587,000. Vehicles and equipment has about $500,000, and that's because it was kind of a lagger. We did actually purchase our vehicles and equipment in 2022 out of sales tax because that one didn't get transferred or wasn't in the budget correctly or something. And then the fleet maintenance reserve fund has about $735,000. But as you'll recall, our enterprise cars just started coming in heavy in the end of 2022, so we'll see that number go down a little bit too.
Back to the gas tax. I'm sure it's a different category, but the aviation fuel at the airport, is that taxed?
I don't know.
I got tough
Yes, it
questions
is.
for you today.
Yeah, it is.
It is?
At the same rate.
Okay.
They do, okay. Well, they're not tearing up our roads.
I guess people driving to the airport are, but I don't know what the logic for that
Yeah, and
is.
some of that money, I think, also goes to fund the airport. So
Yeah.
the state collects that pool of money, and then they divvy it out based on population base, and then I think that money also goes into KDOT funds that fund the smaller airports or just airport projects. So I think that's where they get all of that. But it does
Debbie,
do
wasn't
Still
there
a lot of
aviation
fuel out there.
Debbie, wasn't there a change in distribution a few years back in terms of we had a financial responsibility that got covered by
We
the
did, and then
fuel?
we did, and we used to support the airport authority through the capital improvement fund, sales tax capital improvement fund, and a couple of 3 years ago that switched, and we were just reimbursing them for some gas, for some sales tax out there, but we haven't even done that in the last couple of years, so we aren't currently supporting them out of that economic development fund either. I'll have to look at that. That's an interesting question. The next fund is a sanitation fund. It came in under budget, a little bit over budget on revenue. One number that you might be interested in is the interfund transfers. That's actually what they pay for solid waste and then for wet water and wastewater. So that's not really a transfer. They do have some transfers to the general fund, but they're not as significant. But a lot of that number is what they're paying to solid waste for the sanitation.
So they pay a tipping fee.
Right.
Now, our sanitation operation that collects trash for a fee then turns around and pays a tipping fee at the landfill.
And they have recovered their fund balance a little bit since last year when they bought all those carts out of that fund. So they're at about $1.6 million. The solid waste fund, who has been hit very hard this year with repairs and maintenance, we did end up amending that budget to help pay for some of the cost of those repairs. Still came out with a net income of about $680,000, leaving their fund balance at about $6.9 million. They also have, as you recall, we've kind of left money in here in anticipation of closure, post-closure. They do have a post-closure reserve fund that has about $910,000 in it, and a capital reserve fund of about $1.4 million. But that won't even buy them a bulldozer, so that's not a lot. So we'll be reviewing that fund balance in the operating fund to see what we need to do to get it more into a capital reserve for that fund in particular.
You may recall they presented a while back and went into considerable detail in terms of inventorying their equipment and their life cycle and replacement schedule. And that accounting trues up more so with this fund balance than our current target fund balance. And so as Debbie said, we'll be diving into that in greater detail.
The golf course fund did not meet the revenues that we had anticipated. And they did come in under budget, but we had anticipated that their we had budgeted a net loss. So we did end up doing an internal fund transfer of about $10,000 into that fund just to make sure we could cover their expenditures and keep them closer to their target fund balance, but not at their target fund balance. And as you recall, the nets were closed and there was some rebates of fees and things like that.
Yeah, do we have any idea what impact that had on us, with the driving range and then also with the I don't know if we refunded or we extended memberships. Do we have any idea how that affected our
We
bottom line?
extended memberships unless someone elected not to, and
I'm going to say it was about $28,000.
yeah, they quantified it at one point, but I
So basically, if we'd have had a normal year, we may not have had to do the fund transfer, is what I guess
Possibly,
I was
yeah.
trying to get at. Okay.
If we collected all those memberships in the year, because they're
all
cycled.
scattered,
Yeah, they're all scattered all over the place. The water and wastewater fund came in about $1.5 million over budget on revenue and about $4.3 million under budget on expenses, leaving it with a net income of about $1.6 million. The original fund balance was about $22 million. It's about $23,500,000 now. They also have a capital reserve fund balance of about $10.8 million. We've had a lot of discussions about them. We know there's a lot of debt coming up with the new wastewater plant project. So we'll be looking at that again probably late in the summer to see where those numbers are kind of coming out. And once we get a final bid, we do have a guaranteed price, maximum price bid right now, so that'll give us a better idea where that's going to shake out when we look at those rates later in the summer. The next two funds are the Work Comp Reserve Fund and the Health Insurance Fund. We did set policies for these as far as what we wanted those target fund balances to be, and that we'll be calculating those target fund balances here in the next month probably. But the work comp has about $948,000 in it, and the health insurance fund has about $3.8 million in it. So we probably will anticipate doing something with that health insurance fund per the resolution that we adopted back in '21. Central Garage, they were one of the most affected with fuel costs. We did do, they had about, of their $1.4 million in commodities, about $870,000 of that was just fuel, and that's just diesel and gas. That doesn't count oil or anything like that. We did do an amended budget for them. They came in with a net loss of about $115,000, which is better than actually what we budgeted. And their fund balance right now is about $278,000 with the target of $100,000. The bond and interest fund, we anticipated coming in about about a $500,000 income. We came in about a $48,000. This is one we need to do a little bit more looking at to make sure payments were posted correctly and things like that. According to our preliminary numbers, it has an ending fund balance of about $1.4 million. I'm not going to go over, because of time, the next few slides where we were looking at the gas prices and what they actually did, what we anticipated they did and what they didn't do, or the cost of the pay plan. I just wanted to provide those to you because we know that those were huge. We thought they were going to be huge effects on what our numbers looked like in the end. And so those graphs kind of show you where they shook out once we got the actual numbers in there. So we'll skip over to the Star Bond District performance on slide 32. And I'll just give you a broad picture, and you can ask questions because this is very confusing. Overall, we did collect our baseline about mid-year. We collected in the state distribution about 95% of what was projected. For those that weren't around then, before we did Star Bonds, we paid for a revenue projection study, and so they did projections on what they anticipated that revenue would be based on what the projects were at the time, which there's some newer projects now, and there's some of the projects maybe not as big as what they thought, but we did hit those projections. This would be the first year we hit those projections in 2022 for local and transient guest tax. I think the more important information is on the next two slides and the slide that I added in for you. So basically, if you look at the numbers, we're under what they projected we would be. However, if we look at the numbers, we've paid in advance payments that we wouldn't have been required to pay. So on slides 33 and 34, 34 gives you the payment schedule that we're required to make on the right-hand side. The payment schedule on the left is what was in the bond analysis when they were trying to analyze how much bonds it could support and things like that. That was that scheduled payment that they were anticipating. Once it all shook out, the required payments are what came out in the bond agreement. So we have made principal payments in advance of our first payment that was due in 2030. And so that's a good thing. The additional slide that I gave you just kind of shows you, Jacob, it should be the next one. The portion in gray, and I hope this makes more sense than anything else that I provided you, the portion in gray is what we've actually done to date. So we've collected a certain amount of taxes. We had to meet our baseline. We paid out of capitalized interest, which was money they set aside in the bond issue to pay the first few years, knowing that we wouldn't have revenue. So we've used that up, and then we were able to keep up with the payments and make additional payments as that were not required. In this model, what we're showing you is if we don't have any growth from 2022 on, if we collect the exact same sales tax that we did in 2022, we would end up, after paying all of the debt off, with about $5.8 million at the end of this the Star Bond project. However, if we pay those off early, if we get to keep collecting, we pay those off early, that money then starts to come back to us. As soon as we pay off the debt, then it's like a TIF, and all that money then starts coming back to the city. So that's the goal of what we're looking at. But what we're trying to show you here is, if we have no growth, we should be okay to pay those off and have that money left at the end. But as we pay off additional debt, it reduces our interest, so that saves us money. And there's just, there's a lot of moving parts there as to what that would be. So that's kind of what that graph is showing you, if that makes sense. Are there any questions on that?
What if we have declines, that excess money would?
Well, it'll go to pay off the debt early, is what happens. We won't leave it in there, because what happened is we'll pay off the debt earlier than what we should have, and then once we do that and we close the district, then the state starts getting their sales tax back, and we start getting back all of our sales tax.
Okay.
Right now, we're getting that baseline, and then what we'd end up getting is the difference between the baseline and what we're collecting today.
So then you may also recall that there was two bond issues, a base bond issue and a subordinate bond issue. And so the subordinate bonds are about 4.3 million, and if you look in that required schedule, they don't even show up as a required payment. So as Debbie described, we'll pay in advance if we have the opportunity. In an absolute worst case scenario, those subordinate bonds would have to wait, or they might not get paid at all.
So we're 5 years into a 20-year bond now.
Yes, yes. Yep. Okay, and then the last report I provided you is a new one. You've never seen it before, but I wanted to just give you an idea kind of what we're doing with the investments. We've been trying to be a lot more aggressive with our investments because interest rates have been going up. So we've been trying to get not only shillings money out there, they were kind of a driver. The $67 million for the cleanup at Schilling, but we're trying to get our own city money invested in order for us to get a higher return on our dollar. So this report is something that I have to provide to get expanded powers. And so it just basically shows you where we have our money held as far as banks and what types of investments we have. So we have certificates of deposit of about $38 million. And we have treasury notes, which is just a U.S. Treasury note of about $85 million. And a total portfolio with liquid assets of about $239 million. And that's all I have, unless you have specific questions. And this is a report that I'm going to try to provide quarterly, so that you can kind of just see how we're doing with that investments
You're in the
portfolio.
process of negotiating new rates. Is that what I got?
We did with our bank, as you recall, last week, we selected a new bank provider, so we'll see that interest rate as soon as we can get converted over to them. We'll see that interest rate go up because they have a specific index that they're going to be paying us, and that'll be on the liquid funding. So we'll be collecting a much higher interest rate on our cash on hand as opposed to our investments. So CDs and treasury notes, that'll be on our cash.
And then on an ongoing basis, we're going to the market for CDs, treasury notes, and assessing how much we need liquid and what the appropriate term for those different investments might be.
Right. Any other questions? Comments? And like I said, we will be talking about this as strategic planning because we will need to address those fund balances.
Thank you. Debbie, any other questions from the commission? If not, we'll be back here at 4 o'clock. always the calm before the storm. It gets quiet in here, so. Okay, it is 4 o'clock. I will call the Salina City Commission regular meeting for February, 13th to order. I would first look to city staff confirming that the Kansas Open Meeting Act required notice has been properly provided.
Yes.
Thank you. Could we have roll call?
Mayor Hoppick,
Here.
Commissioner Davis,
Here.
Commissioner Linkowitz,
Here.
Commissioner Longbine,
Here.
Commissioner Ryan.
Here.
Thank you. Would all those that are able please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, that will lead us to awards and proclamations.
Item 3.1, recognition of the week of February 19 through February 25, 2023 as Engineers Week in the city of Salina. Rex Ritter, president of the Smoky Valley chapter of the Kansas Society of Professional Engineers, will read the proclamation.
Whereas George Washington, the first president of the United States, and founding father of our nation, was a distinguished military and agricultural engineer, as well as an excellent surveyor. And whereas engineers have used their scientific knowledge and technical skills in creative and innovative ways to improve the quality of life and fulfill society's needs. And whereas engineers are encouraging our young math and science students to realize the practical power of their knowledge by sponsoring programs such as the Future City Competition and Math Counts. And whereas engineers adhere to a strong code of ethics and standards of conduct promoting personal accountability, ethical decision-making, and quality work such that citizens will look to engineers for their knowledge and skills to meet the challenges of the future. And whereas this year's theme for the event is Creating the Future, and it is appropriate to recognize engineers' countless accomplishments and contributions during the week we celebrate George Washington's birthday. Now, therefore, I, Michael L. Hoppick, Mayor of the City of Salina, Kansas, do hereby proclaim the week of February 19th through February 25th, 2023 as Engineers Week in the City of Salina, and call this observation to the attention of our citizens for their contribution to our health, safety, and welfare by engineers in our community and beyond.
Thank you. Do you have any special events scheduled during this week or month?
Yes, well, this past weekend, we hosted our local chapter's math counts competition with the Tri-Valley chapter in Manhattan at K-State's Engineering Building. And then later this week, we'll be hosting our local chapter's award banquet.
Good. Okay. Anything else you'd like to share with us?
I don't think so.
Well, I'm
Thank
glad
you.
that some of you do that because I know I wouldn't be doing that because of my math scores. So we appreciate it.
All
So
right.
if you come up here, I have a proclamation for you. Okay. That will lead us to item 3.2.
Item 3.2, recognition of the month of February 2023 as Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month in the city of Salina. Marlon Hurd, youth advocate at DVAC, will read the proclamation.
Welcome.
Hello. Okay, whereas 1 in 3 adolescents in the United States is victim of physical, emotional, verbal abuse from dating partners, a figure that far exceeds victimization rates from other types of violence affecting youth. And
Whereas females between the ages 16 to 24 are most vulnerable to intimate partner and sexual violence, experiencing abuse at a rate almost triple the national average. And
Whereas high school students who experience physical violence in a dating relationship are more likely to use drugs and alcohol and are greater risks of suicide and are much more likely to carry patterns of abuse into future relationships. And
whereas young people victimized by a dating partner are more likely to engage in risky sexual behavior and unhealthy dieting behaviors, and the experience may disrupt normal development of self-esteem and body images. And
whereas nearly half of teens who experience dating violence report that incidents of abuse took place in a school building or school grounds. And
whereas only 33% of teens who are in an abusive relationship ever tell anyone about the abuse, and 81% of parents surveyed either believe teen dating violence is not an issue or admit they do not know if it is one. And
whereas by providing young people, parents, and professionals with education about healthy relationships, warning signs of abuse, and relationship skills, and by changing attitudes that support violence, we recognize that dating violence can be prevented. And
whereas the Domestic Violence Association of Central Kansas needs all of Salina to work toward ending teen dating violence by empowering young people to develop healthier relationships, assisting victims in assessing the information and supportive services they need, creating better and more resources for young people in need, instituting effective intervention and prevention policies in schools, and engaging in discussion with family members and peers to promote awareness and prevention of the quiet epidemic of teen dating violence.
Thank you.
By the way, I'm Brenda Mai.
Hi, Brenda. Thank you for being here, both of you. As I've said about things like this before, in a perfect world, we really wish we didn't have DVAC in our community, but we do appreciate the work that is done. Could you explain a little bit about how you educate the community on this? And I guess one of the disturbing parts of this was that 66% of teens do not report, and how you educate those that should be reporting that it's okay to do and who to report to.
With that, we just go into the high schools to make sure like they're understanding of it, help teachers out understanding of it, where they're not blaming any kids, just accept the kids' feedback and things like that, and give them more tools and things to like help our youth succeed from the teen dating violence, things like that.
We go into the colleges, we're in the high schools, we're in some of the elementary schools also. We do quite a few presentations.
Great.
So.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and I have a proclamation here for.
Thank you.
Okay, we have no public hearings or items scheduled for a certain time, so that will bring us to consent agenda.
Item 5.1, approve the minutes of February 6, 2023.
Do we have any additions or deletions to the minutes?
Mayor, I move the minutes be approved as presented.
Second. We have a motion and a second to approve consent agenda item 5.1. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That passes 5-0. That will lead us to administration.
Item 6.1, authorize the mayor to enter into a First Amendment to the Salina Community Economic Development Organization, Inc. Members Agreement.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. Debbie Pack, Director of Finance. In November of 2005, the city entered into a members agreement with the Salina Community Economic Development Organization, along with the Salina Airport Authority, Saline County, and Salina Area Chamber of Commerce. Section 14.3 of that agreement states that the corporation, or SCEDO, will annually have prepared and submit to the members at a minimum a cash and transaction audit by a certified public accountant. SCEDO is currently providing on a monthly basis their financial statements in the form of income statements and balance sheets and a disbursement detail. During their 2021 audit of the SCEDO, their outside auditors notified them that due to staff shortages and increasing costs, that they were no longer going to move forward with the auditing of their financials, and that they also brought together with them some alternatives for them and presented them to the SCEDO in June of 2022. After that presentation from their auditors, SCEDO staff approached the city staff or airport authority staff asking if there were some alternatives to the language in the agreement that might be able to meet the intent of the agreement under another alternative so that they could keep their current auditors. After review of the alternates and after the city conferred with their own outside auditors for their opinion of the options, both the city staff and the airport authority staff felt that a review or an audit would be provide sufficient assurances that the intent of the financial reports were being met and that the financial oversight was sufficient to mitigate any financial risks. The attached amendment that I provided to section 14.3 allows the SCEDO to submit either a review or an audit of financial statements. There are some other factors that have to be considered before the board has that option. First of all, there are laws that require certain nonprofits to have an audit. For example, if a nonprofit has income of over $500,000, if any of the members would require them to have an audit, then that would be so. And then if there's any other source of their revenue that maybe they got a grant or something like that, that would require them to have an audit. If none of those three items would apply, then the language in the amendment would allow the board to decide if they wanted to have a full audit or just a review. The annual cost of the audit, the difference in the cost is about $5,000 for the SCEDO. The cost of the audit is currently paid out of their annual budget, of which the city provides annual funding of $275,000. Our contribution is about 76% of their total budget, and the $10,000 that it's costing them currently is about 2.7% of their total budget. So staff has identified the following options for City Commission. Number one is to authorize the mayor to sign the First Amendment to the Salina Community Economic Development Organization Members Agreement. Two is to authorize the signature with amendments as you might deem appropriate. Three is to postpone consideration of the authorization and give staff with additional information that you might require to make that decision. Or four, vote to deny the authorization, leaving the agreement as is, which requires an audit for the SCEDO. Staff recommends option number one. I would be open for questions. I know Mitch Robinson's also here if you have any questions for the SCEDO.
Any questions? Yes.
Just on section 14.2 of the current, it refers to records inspection. It is short, just upon reasonable request from a member, the corporation shall at any time during normal business hours make available its financial records for inspection or audit by a representative of the member. So if a member felt that an audit was required, the member would then be paying for the audit, and
No.
that it would be...
No, according to the amendment, if a member, any of the members, whether that's the city, the county, the airport authority, or the chamber, felt that an audit was required, then we could say, we want you to have an audit this year, and they would be responsible for that. 14.2 is records inspection. That means any of those members, 4 members, could tell the SCEDO, we want to come in and look at your records, and that we would have access to their financial records to look at those records on our own.
Right, so audit there is not referring to a formal audit?
No, that's
okay.
that's an audit by the member.
Member, okay.
Yeah.
Commissioner Ryan, any questions?
I just might say I've sat on, as liaison on the Economic Development Board and heard this conversation and discussion the past year, and I think that the $10,000 total audit was kind of a waste of resources, and I think the board had moved in a good direction.
And I'm guessing that you've looked at their books. I'm guessing the number of transactions is minimal that they have compared to most corporations that require an audit and stuff.
Yeah,
so
there's not a whole lot there.
there.
I will also mention that we do have other agreements that have the same requirements, so we may be looking at some of those other agreements as well to make sure that we're treating everybody fairly. So we'll be looking at those agreements as well.
And then if I could offer one minor thing, as one of 3 members to the agreement, the other 2 members will need to consent. So we'll coordinate the mayor's signature and execution with the other bodies taking their necessary action to concur.
Right.
Okay, is there any comments or questions from the public? Please come to the podium.
Good afternoon. I'm Greg Stevens. I live at 842 South 10th. I'm semi-retired from K-State Technology Management Business Program. One of the boards I serve on does a annual review, so I see the benefit and know the benefit of that. And I support the EDO, what Mitch is doing in the group. So there is a place for reviews, but I don't know if this is the place for a review. I'm speaking because I have some concerns and questions. There's a difference between a review and an audit, as most people know. The reviewer visits with the director probably, and I visited with a CPA about this and to find out if the information's correct. There's no testing of internal controls. It's mostly based on statements. And I understand that members can look too. On the other hand, the auditor performs a third-party review, tests the controls in the company, inspects records, does other procedures like interviews, reviews ethics questions, checks for fraud. I'm sure we won't have fraud, but it's a higher level of public assurance that this isn't just based on the statements. If there's a question from the public, the third-party auditor has provided that higher level. And as Debbie mentioned, federal grants and other grants may require audits. Skipping an audit for a year, according to the auditor I talked to, may make the audit year more time-consuming for the auditor, because while the audit is just done for that 1 year, you got this year back here, maybe 2 years, and they may ask a few more questions and make more time. The person I talked to was an auditor for the federal government, my brother, and who worked for several years. So that may cost a little bit more, he said, because they did do that sometimes. The cost savings mentioned at 2.7%. If we do a review, that's going to cost $5,000. So the cost savings is about 1.5%. It's less than 1.5%, which might be a pretty good, prudent investment. Nonprofit and public groups are under a lot more scrutiny than for-profit groups because the public has constituents. And I'm sure the EDO board, here's another question I have, is I'm not sure the EDO board has a finance or a audit committee. So a lot of groups do that. And without an audit or a finance committee, that takes another level of assurances out of the question. So if I were a member of the EDO board or an organization, I have some fiduciary responsibility, and an audit would reassure me that I'm covering that responsibility.
Okay.
For example, last week...
We give 3 minutes, so we're
Okay,
over that. So just please
things.
wrap it up if you
Okay,
could.
last week
and then
during the city commission meeting, there's a question about tax abatements. And Debbie answered it by saying, the answer is an audit for the city published on the website confirms contains the information you've requested. That was the answer. She referred the constituent to review the website, and the audit had that information. She wouldn't be able to do that without an audit. So to wrap up, given today's importance of accountability and transparency, I think being careful, maintaining the audit, may be the more prudent action to take. Thank you for your time.
Ms. Pack, could you answer the question about that was referred to
Particular one.
I guess the one that he mentioned that we referred someone to our website.
Oh, yes, I did. When Mr. Blanchard asked about what our tax abatements were, there is a list in our audit. We're required as part of our financial information to list any tax that we're giving.
But that was not anything that dealt with
Has nothing to do with
SCEDO.
this. No,
Okay.
I think, and his point was, if we didn't have an audit, we wouldn't necessarily have that information available.
Does the SCEDO, do they produce monthly
They
balance
produce-
sheets and financial statements?
And detailed reports of transactions. So at any month, any member can see all of the transactions that are going in and out of their fund, payroll, paying for bills, or anything like that. We have a listing of all those transactions. We're not auditing those. We're not, we're not saying who gave you permission to do that or anything like that, but they are there. And there is a little bit of testing in a review as opposed to an audit, I will agree. There's not, has testing of internal controls, but they do some testing of the actual financial information. And there is some level, a limited level of assurance from the outside auditor that the financial statements are accurate. They're certainly not at the level of an audit.
Who is currently preparing the monthly financials for the EDO?
Their internal staff.
Is there a finance subcommittee? I don't know.
Since January 1, Woodson.
Could you, go ahead, we know who you are, could you please?
Mitch Robinson,
Thank you.
Executive Director, Salina Economic Development Organization. Since January 1, the auditor is now handling all the transactions we do, so we understand the concern that Greg has, and our treasurer and our board members realize it's going to take more of a requirement for them to be even more, doing more reviews of our financials, so they understand that.
Do you have internal controls as far as 2 signatures required on checks over a certain amount?
Yes, sir, we do.
Okay. And what is that amount? Do you remember?
2,500.
2,500, okay.
So, and just to clarify, when you say that the accountant is preparing your financials, they're doing a monthly financial accounting?
Yes, they handle all the checks now, and they provide us, it all goes through them now versus us having it formally with my assistant.
So they're performing complete accounting services for you then?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay. Any other comments or questions from the public?
You know, this I'll just make this other additional comment. This was somewhat of a surprise when the auditor, brought this up with us and made the recommendation to do this. I mean, we were not looking to make any changes. We'd had discussions previously, but we knew we were required to do an audit, and that's part of the rules, and we were glad to do that. So when she suggested we make a change because of their staffing problems and issues that they were seeing, they made the recommendation that we look at an alternative, which is why we're here tonight.
Thank you, Mitch.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, I'll bring it back to the commission for any further discussion or action.
Mayor, I authorize the mayor to sign the First Amendment to the Salina Community Economic Development Organization Incorporated Members Agreement.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second to authorize the mayor to sign the First Amendment to the Salina Community Economic Development Organization Members Agreement. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That passes 5-0. Thank you. That will bring us to development business, item 7.1.
Item 7.1, approve resolution number 23-8108, authorizing the preparation and submittal of an application to the Kansas Housing Resources Corporation for the 2023 American Rescue Plan Act Moderate Income Housing Grant Program, and authorizing the city manager to execute the grant agreement, direct any administrative actions, and execute any documents necessary to implement the terms of the agreement.
Ms. Driscoll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. We're talking about several items kind of under this guise of housing this evening, so bear with me. I'm going to have to kind of go over some of the background and history a couple different times. So this may start to sound a little familiar, but I appreciate your patience. So, as you are aware, we have been very much engaged in dealing with how to provide more housing in Salina related to future employees that are related to corporate expansion of some major employers, as well as overall growth in the community. Because of this need, we have been working with RDG, updated our 2015-2016 housing plan, did a 2021 update, supplemental update is often what we refer to it as. Along with doing that supplemental update, we did a housing incentive policy that highlighted RHIDs and IRBs in particular, and the scoring criteria and the need for those incentives and when we would apply those. We've also found that the market is continually changing in the world of housing based on construction, labor, and a variety of other factors, most recently interest rates. Therefore, we have made a commitment, at least till 2025, to update our housing supplements annually with fresh numbers, just to make sure that we have the most current information for you in your decision making. So we are currently on our 2022 Live Salina Housing Plan Supplement. That most recent plan update, in conjunction with the others, does identify the need for housing incentives in our goal of increasing housing production. Most recently, in the last 24 months, you have acted on IRBs, particularly for the Cedarhurst Senior Living Facility via Resolution 21-7997 in October of that year. And in RHIDs, which is Rural Housing Incentive District, you have acted on Southview Estates via Resolution 21-7994 in October of 2021. And then Aero Plains through Resolution 22-8023 in March of 2022. You've also given support and applied for moderate income housing grants through the state of Kansas, which is one of the most common housing funding programs. We administer and manage and have applied for those grants on behalf of developments, particularly Southview Estates, under the FY 2021 grant cycle via Resolution 21-7986. We were awarded that MIH, and I'll get into more of that later. And then Aero Plains under FY 2022 via Resolution 22-8077. That one was not awarded, hence the discussion we're having this evening. There's also a new tax credit out there that we're discussing this evening, is related to this application, but particular action related to the Kansas Housing Investor Tax Credit will be following this action. Aero Plains applied for this tax credit in 2022 via Resolution 22-8077 as part of the MIH application that they had submitted. The new tax credit program was launched just finishing the legislative session last year. The legislature wanted to see it implemented before this year's session, which begins in just a couple weeks. So they married the two programs together, knowing MIH was established, and the types of projects coming through our MIH would likely qualify for the new housing tax credit program. So they said, hey, if you're going to submit for MIH, you have to submit for this new housing tax credit. So any applications that went in last fall, around August, had one of these submitted, whether they really wanted it or not. So if we focus on MIH and this particular request for application related to Aero Plains, give you a little background on the Moderate Income Housing Program, which is the first component here. We have applied for these before. The purpose behind the moderate income housing program is typically to provide assistance where federal assistance doesn't work. So it's that state support when the federal money isn't there. It's awarded to cities and counties for multifamily rentals, single family for purchase homes, and infrastructure in communities with populations fewer than 60,000 people. That would be us, so we qualify. The program has seen considerable changes since 2021. We saw the first of these changes this last fall. Due to new funding and greater state prioritization around housing, total programming funds for MIH in 2022 have increased from $2 million annually to $40 million, with a one-time infusion of ARPA funds. All funding and sources include $22 million available through the State Housing Trust Fund, $20 million through the Revolving Loan Program, and an additional $20 million through the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA. With the increased availability and maximum statewide impact, KHRC has revised the maximum funding award from $400,000 to a max of $650,000. Per the 2023 ARPA funds, real quick, there are these different cycles. They're going to have 3 cycles this 2022 year. There are the regular MIH ones, and then we have this ARPA infusion. What we're talking today about is the ARPA-infused MIH application. So the one...
You mean for 2023, there'll be...
Well, yes.
So you said 2022, but we're
Sorry.
talking about 2023. Okay.
Yes.
Thank
So
you.
we first saw this infusion of money in 2022. It's
right.
continuing into 2023. So this new funding, what we have found is when they did it in August, which would have been the most recent cycle that this application went into, it was not for ARPA money. It was just from the state funds that had been allocated. The state hadn't been very clear about that. And this latest round, this is round 2 of that 12-month cycle, is specifically an ARPA round. And it has been designated for large impact projects. There will be another round that comes after this that is just a regular MIH application round. Depending on how ARPA dollars fall out from this large impact round, they may throw more money into future rounds. The idea is the ARPA money has to be spent by 2026. So the state is kind of looking to see what's coming in, putting those out. But the application that's going in today for Aero Plains is specifically ARPA-related MIH funds, large impact. And how that changes things is rather than the max $650,000 that we typically can apply for, they can apply for a significantly higher number of dollars. So, and we do and have checked qualify for using additional ARPA funds under this program, because as many cities and counties have been working with the state on some of these programs, if we've received ARPA monies in a certain way, sometimes we don't qualify for these additional programs, but we do qualify for this one, so that has been confirmed. And following the unsuccessful application earlier, or late, I should say late last year, staff took an opportunity that KHRC provided, what they call office hours, along with a consultant hired by the applicant or the developer to help with the application process, met during those office hours with KHRC to learn how the application could be better, could be stronger, and even they identified that this project was particularly best suited for a large impact project because of the number of units and the timeliness in which the project would be developed. And so their current request is on the same vacant 53.26 acre parcel and is for the same number of units as they were going to produce. The entire project has 169 lots, each with 2 units per lot. Therefore, the total number of build-out is 338. The project is broken up into 2 phases. Phase 1 is 75 lots, which means 150 units, and Phase 2 has 94 lots with 188 units. The current request is for Phase 1. If you were to adopt Resolution 23-8108, it would authorize submission of the application for $1.5 million. Previously, as we discussed, they asked for $650,000. But under this large impact MIH ARPA, they can ask for more. If awarded funding in March of 2023, you would authorize the city manager to accept the award and grant agreement regarding administration of the grant and the relationship and obligations of Building Kansas LLC. The funds would be used to construct the 75 lots and the 150 homes, as I discussed earlier. An update to the application would include applying for all 150 units in Phase 1. Earlier, we had just applied for 50 because there was less funding. This would lower the per unit asking from $13,000 per unit to $10,000 per unit. There is a subsequent agenda item, as I mentioned, and that is for the Housing Investor Tax Credit. That would be for 40 homes within Aero Plains Phase 1 at a maximum ask of $30,000 per unit. The total ask for 2023 Kansas Housing Income Tax Credit application is $1.2 million of state income tax credits to be shared with private investors of the subdivision. The reason I mention that is not because it is particularly part of this decision-making process, but maybe part of the Commission's decision-making process in kind of the total incentive package. In addition, on January 7th of 2023, staff received a letter from Building Kansas LLC requesting an amendment for their RHID development agreement. You approved Resolution 228023, creating the Aero Plains RHID development agreement in March of 2022. The RHID funding captured through that development agreement is meant to be 100% for 25 years, for a total of a little over $11 million. That was the amount identified of eligible expenses. The amount of identified eligible expenses totals almost $7 million. So the difference is we've got a time period. They're eligible to capture those taxes. That total capture estimated would be a little over $11 million. They can only use those monies on certain eligible expenses. So part of the development agreement is you total up those eligible expenses, and that's really all they could spend that on, right? So they have less eligible expenses than the amount of money that would actually be captured in 25 years at 100%. That distinction is important because the request to update their development agreement would allow them to increase the level of eligible expenses. They have found since the development agreement was passed that supplies, labor, and interest rates have greatly affected the cost of their project, and that they would like to amend that number. They also found that when they had originally brought their project forward, they had intended and had hoped to get the MIH grant. Due to the timing of the application deadline for this grant, along with the income tax credit grant, and the recent request for the amendment to the development agreement, staff was not able to time these to bring them all to you at the same time. So unfortunately, we're here acting on the grant agreements when you may say, hey, staff, it would have been great if we could have had the development agreement and the grants all at the same time to do this one cohesive action. That those are deadlines we can't change. What I will tell you is we have been working with bond counsel and the developers and are prepared at your March 6th meeting to bring forward a development agreement that basically has built-in options. You would know what the development agreement would look like based on their revised proposal of cost plus MIH. You would know what it would look like without MIH. You would know what it looks like with MIH plus the income tax credit component, because each of those affects really kind of that bottom line for them and for the price of the unit. And that is something that is described and quantified in the development agreement along with timelines. We won't know on March 6th if they've been awarded these grants. So in talking with bond counsel, what they have suggested is if the body so chooses, it could adopt a development agreement that essentially had these various options in them. And depending on the outcome of those grants, The development agreement would simply enact what became so. So I think they were saying if it's like, if we set a date of like April 30th, by April 30th, if they have been awarded, then this option would be correct. If they hadn't been awarded, then this option would be correct. You will, of course, get to see that development agreement beyond what I'm describing at your March 6th meeting. But that is kind of our solution of trying to address both their request that came in January and also their request to apply for these programs. As a fiscal note, if you approve this resolution of support, an application for MIH, ARPA on behalf of Aero Plains or Building Kansas LLC, the city is not required to provide matching funds, and the city does provide some grant administration, but it is primarily 2 to 5 months or 2 to 5 hours a month, depending on where the project is at any one point. And it's mainly taking in receipts, verifying those, submitting them to the state, some mild reporting on making sure they're meeting certain construction requirements. But I would say in the world of grant administration, it's pretty minimal compared to most things. So staff has identified the following options for the City Commission's consideration. As I mentioned, you have Resolution 22-8108 in front of you authorizing us to apply and accept an ARPA MIH grant for Aero Plains housing development. If you choose option 1, you would approve the resolution. Option 2 would be amendments or further direction from you as a body. 3 would be to postpone consideration to a specific date and provide more direction. Or 4 is to vote to deny the resolution. Happy to answer any questions, and I believe representation from this entity is here. Yes.
Okay, I'll start to my right.
I think the questions I have might be more appropriate in the following agenda item pertaining to, and it kind of goes against my free market sensibility, but these programs, they help these projects, and it kind of begs the question, is this to offset overages from inflation, higher interest rates, construction, miscellaneous construction costs, or is any of this going to possibly affect the purchase price of the properties?
So MIH is specifically about the purchase price of the homes. So in the other MIH that we have, which we accepted is for Southview Estates, and so our agreement with the state says X number of units, it's 24? 24 units have to be purchased by people in the moderate income range as designated by KHRC. And then a secondary mortgage of $5,000 is placed on the property and is held for 5 years until that is complete. And the idea is to keep that under single home ownership, not for it to be flipped or turned into an investment property, to stay in that moderate category. And if someone, for whatever reason chooses, they have to sell the unit, they can, but you would lose some of that secondary mortgage. It's basically a financial penalty. But if you're going to stay in the home for 5 years, then you would get that money back at the end. So that MIH is specifically about the home price, and that's negotiated both in our development agreement. I'm sorry, it is in the grant agreement for MIH. Now, the income housing tax credit, which is not necessarily a decision in front of you, but we have discussed in kind of an entire incentive package, is the newest. The state's had MIH for a while. It was always meant to kind of get to the housing stock that was really in the middle. It wasn't super low, and it wasn't even on the higher end of low-income housing. It was really more for rural communities, hence the population control or population limit on who can apply. This program, the Economic Incentive Program for tax credits, is something new that came out of the legislature, and it was really just to incentivize housing production. An example is the Brock Townhomes or the Brock Court Townhomes that are in a future action that you've got on the agenda tonight. They're too small for MIH. It doesn't make sense for an RHID. They didn't meet our criteria for IRB, and it wasn't the right tool for them. the income tax credit is a good incentive for a project like that. It's always kind of the challenging part with economic incentives is where you apply them. We've tried to be consistent in what the body did in adopting your housing policy for incentives. So RHID and IRBs have an incentive criteria that helps to prioritize those. I think staff's realizing, I mean, we just didn't know coming out of COVID as the state started putting all this money into the system for these two programs that we should probably identify some criteria for these. And the ARPA money has been a little unpredictable. I'm sure the body's aware the amount of grant programs we've applied for in the last 30 days has been significant. And it's been kind of short warning on knowing when that money was coming into the system and how. With that, I think the city manager's got something to add.
I think it'd be useful to give the applicant an opportunity to kind of give their sense of what's going on in the market and how this impacts their development. Staff's had the opportunity to have that conversation with them, and I think it was very informative, and might be a good time to give them a chance to address the
and
commission.
I'll remain here for any technical questions. I hope Commissioner Linkowitz that answered your question. MIH is about the home price. The income tax credit does not necessarily require that.
Thank you.
Gary Hobby, Salina, Kansas. Thank you for allowing me a minute or two to ask for your support for the MIH ARPA funding for this round, anyway, of the housing units. We'd so much like to get started as soon as possible. With the weather like today, it's one of those days you want to go out and start scratching in the dirt. Commissioner Linkwitz, you're exactly right. You're a great question, but these funds will be used to buy down the costs of the house. It's been our goal all along to use both sets of these funding opportunities to buy down the costs of the house, keeping it within that moderate income housing income level. We would appreciate your support today. If I can answer any other questions, I'll be glad to do that.
I
Yes,
have one. Refresh my memory, is this going to be 100% ownership development or a combination?
At this particular time, we've been working on 100% ownership. It may be a factor that goes into the development agreement that we allow some rental units to be had.
Nothing here.
I do have several questions. So we're talking about the 150 units being built. How many of those have to be MIH qualified?
24, correct? Or is that to 50?
I believe 50.
50. It was 50 units.
50 of the 150. Based on, we always have changing environment for housing. If the 150 are not built, how does that affect these funds? Are they paid out based on how many are completed? How does that work?
So it would be based on what grant agreement. I want to specify the difference between MIH and things like the RHID development agreement. They're two separate documents. The MIH grant agreement is just like any grant agreement we would have with a subrecipient. We essentially act as a pass-through and administrator on the state's behalf. That is what dictates the MIH piece. The RHID development agreement is that contractual relationship we have dealing with that district and that component. What relates them is the body's concern maybe related to the price of the units that are established in the development agreement, the timelines that are established in the development agreement, things like that. But they are separate documents. MIH, that grant agreement will require X amount of houses be owner-occupied, unless other specified, but to my understanding, we had not talked about rentals. So it had been owner-occupied. They're owner-occupied in the other MIH that we have. And so that needs to stay that way. And then all of those need to be completed. They are on a quarterly basis, so X amount of construction gets completed, they hand in receipts. If something were to, let's say out of the 50 units, they were only able to get paid back on 25, they don't have a lump sum of money. They're only getting paid back as they complete them. So let's say they got half of them complete, then that's where essentially the grant would end, we'd reach out to the state and say, look, they weren't able to complete.
Because out of the 150, 50 are supposed to be MIH, but if they got 100 completed and none of those met the MIH, have they been paid?
So I believe we try to get those done first, like the ones that are in Southview right now. As many as you can get to qualify are trying to get those identified and done first.
Okay.
So those have a priority.
But correct me if I'm wrong, there's a direct connection between the MIH funds and the units dedicated to MIH. The 150 is above and beyond the MIH program in terms of our development agreement and RHID.
Yeah. I mean, it's really, the MIH is most concerned about the 50. Get their 50 done. But the money can be spent on the whole 150.
Okay. Okay. So that's up to the state to monitor that, I guess, if they had to stop the project and hadn't had 50 of them sell under the MIH program.
Correct.
Okay.
So it would be us administering that and saying, hey, state, this is all they've submitted for. They can't produce any more as required.
So that would be between the developer and the state to work
Correct.
that out. Okay.
We just act as a middleman.
Okay. And I know we said they couldn't be sold as rental properties, and I'll ask Mr. Hobby, I believe this is similar to what you've done in Lindsborg, and I believe when some of them didn't sell, the developers did rent them out. Is that correct? And is that doable under?
I can answer, it would not be allowable under MIH.
But would it be allowable? I guess that would be something that would fall in the development agreement?
Correct.
Okay.
That 50 have to stay owner occupied.
And one other thing on the development agreement, you've talked about we have this or this or this. In other words, if they do not get approved for either one of these, this would be our target price.
Correct.
If we get the MIH and not the other, here's our target price.
Correct.
If we get this and this, here's our target price. And that will be set out in the development agreement.
Yes, sir.
So there's no negotiating of the sale price once we have the development agreement done.
Correct.
Okay. And that's a maximum. They can always sell them for less.
Yes.
Yeah, obviously. But that is the maximum price. Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
I think I kind of interrupted your questions of staff by inviting the applicant back up, so I don't know if
No,
that's
that's
a reset.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Okay, I'll open it up to the public. Does the public have any comments or questions? Okay, I don't see anybody online, so, okay, I will bring it back to the commission for action.
Mayor Hoppick, I move that this commission approve resolution number 23-8108 and approve submittal of an ARPA MIH application and authorize the city manager to accept an associated grant agreement at a future date.
Second.
We have on the floor a motion to approve resolution number 23-8108 and approve submittal of an ARPA-MIH application and authorize the city manager to accept an associated grant agreement at a future date. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That passes 5-0. Okay, that will lead us to item 7.2.
Item 7.2, Kansas Housing Investor Tax Credit. 7.2A, approve resolution number 23-8109, proclaiming support for an application by Building Kansas LLC, Aero Plains Housing Development for the Kansas Housing Investor Tax Credit. 7.2B, approve resolution number 23-8110, proclaiming support for an application by Southview Estates Housing Development for the Kansas Housing Investor Tax Credit. And 7.2C, approve resolution number 23-8111, proclaiming support for an application by Sean Kindlesbarger with Brock Road Townhomes Development for the Kansas Housing Investor Tax Credit.
Mayor, I will be recusing myself for the Southview Estates development portion of that. Can we divide this up?
As much as we would like to do these all at once because they tie together, because of Commissioner Ryan's conflict with 7.2B, if it's all right with the commission, we'd like to move that to be the first one to discuss so he can recuse himself and bring him back when we discuss 7.2A and 7.2C. Is the commission? Is the commission okay with that?
No.
Okay,
B is not contingent on A?
no, it's basically three different motions we will make, but they all have the same background, so to respect Commissioner Ryan's request, we'll go
You're
ahead.
going to take B first.
We're going to take B first, so we'll get you. So we will be discussing 7.2B, which is the Southview Estates LLC. Okay.
I'm back. So I think we've kind of covered the overall history of kind of how we've gotten to making some of these decisions. So I'll jump specifically to this particular program, which is the Kansas Housing Investor Tax Credit, or KHITC. This is administered through KHRC, Kansas Housing and Resource Corporation, and was created as part of Kansas HB 2237. The economic incentive is designed to reduce the income tax liability for housing investors proportionally to the awarded credit. So it has $13 million available in tax credits for qualified housing projects located in counties less than 75,000 residents. We qualify. From statute, depending on the population of the county, up to $35,000 per unit in credit can be earned. KHRC will allocate credits to investors that either are a builder, developer, or qualified investor once it has been made in the project, that investment. It's anticipated that credits will be sold for equity in the project, which will help pay for the project. Awards are for no more than $1.2 million credit against the state income tax liability per project per year. So that's up to $30,000 per residential unit and up to 40 units per project per year based on the population that Salina has. Qualified projects are evaluated and determined by KHRC in accordance with Section 42 of the Federal Internal Revenue Code. So last year, when this program was launched, as I mentioned in my last presentation, this program was very new, so it was attached to all of the MIH grants that came forward. As of 2023, the housing tax credit is independent of the other programs and will offer 3 application rounds throughout the year. Therefore, investors in housing projects can apply for the tax credit even if the associated project has not been applied for or awarded through MIH funds. And if they weren't awarded one time, that doesn't stop them from applying again. So there's no limit like that. Additionally, KHITC applicants do not require local governing authority as their applicant. So this is different than MIH. We're not administering this. Today's action is a resolution of support by the body saying, yep, this is something that would be important in our community. We want these houses to occur, but we aren't taking on any type of grant administration role. It will be submitted directly by the developer. Applications do require a resolution of support, as I mentioned, and these applications are due by 5 p.m. on February 17th, 2023. The request before you is specifically in this action item is for Southview Estates, commonly referred to as the Ryan Addition plat, but is now Southview Estates. That is former vacant 25-acre parcel on the corner of South Ohio Street and East Schilling Road, excluding the northeast corner parcel. On February 6, 2023, progress on the 38 units within Phase 1 included 26 structures, 14 single-family homes, and 12 townhomes. Of those, 9 have been listed for sale, 3 have been sold, 2 are under contract, and 4 are still on the market. The remaining 29 are in other various stages of completeness. Installation and drywall is complete in all single-family homes and 6 townhomes. Cabinet installation is complete in 9 single-family homes and 4 townhomes. Trim and painting is complete in 8 single-family homes, 2 townhomes, with finishing work in progress on 1 single-family home and 4 townhomes. Southview Estates was a 2021 recipient of $400,000 of MIH grant funds. Remember, this was part of the cycle where we went from $400,000 to $650,000. So they got $400,000 of the available dollars. Following approval to apply for the grant by the City Commission through Resolution 217986, the state came back and said, we have additional funds for those that we couldn't fully award. We've allocated additional funds. So they got another $208,000 as part of that 2022 award year. Of the total awarded $608,000, $350,000 of that has been distributed to the developers for foundational and vertical construction of the residents within the development. The final $258,000 is to be distributed in 2 more disbursements, with the final disbursement happening once Phase 1 of Southview Estates project is concluded by KHRC. As a note regarding the MIH and timing, I think something to add to the conversation we had earlier, 20% of MIH funding is held until all units are sold. So typically it's submit receipts, we pay you back, submit receipts, we pay you back, you're making progress. But to ensure, to I think Mayor Hoppeck's point of how do you make sure that they really finish all of those first, 20% of that total funding will be held back till the total number of units are sold. So in this case, 24 for their MIH. Southview Estates was also approved for 100% 25-year RHID. As you may remember, fiscal impact of that is about $6.5 million, and that action was taken through Resolution 217994 in October of 21. The developer has noted that during the construction process thus far, cost of materials and labor has increased greatly. Therefore, this current KHITC request for resolution of support is important to help deal with those increased costs. There is representation here from the applicant or developer that can speak more specifically to this. So in summary, the proposed resolution would be a resolution of support for the developer to submit this application to the state. I will note that we have also received, and it's not noted in this blue sheet, I apologize, but we have also received a request from Southview Estates to look at amending their development agreement. That would also be coming forward in March 6th, so same time as Aero Plains. Southview has expressed a need to possibly take some of their units and have them as rentals. Right now, their development agreement specifically, not just MIH agreement, their development agreement for their RHID specifically says all units are owner occupied. They have been approached by folks noting a desire to buy investment properties and to do rentals that way. There's also concerns related to just the ever-increasing cost of materials and the ever-changing interest rate. So that request will be coming before you, not so much related to increasing the tax risk or how much tax needs to be collected under the RHID, but really the terms of what things are being sold at and are they rental or ownership. So staff is working with bond counsel to also prepare those amendments to come in front of you. Resolution 238110 that is in front of you, option 1 is to approve that resolution. 2 is to approve the resolution but with amendments and further direction. 3 is to postpone consideration to a specified date and time. Or 4 is to not deny the resolution. Staff is here to answer any technical questions we can, and as I mentioned, the applicant is here to speak to more detailed answer about their request.
So, Lauren, I may have missed it. You summarized the amendments to the RHID development agreement as making rental a possibility, and then the other item was extending the timeline.
Yes, it would extend the duration. So right now we have everything built on kind of a series of dominoes. So it's, commencement begins, 18 months from that, you have to complete X amount of units. Once that phase is complete, you have to complete another set of units. And so the developers have identified that if houses need to sit a little bit longer on the market, they may need an extended timeline. So that is something, because there are 2 very distinct exhibits in the development agreement. One is your price points, and the other is the timeline in which the project gets completed. We put those types of milestones and timelines in there to ensure that progress is always being made on the end goal for the commission.
Was the original timeline part of the requirement for the agreement to begin with?
Yeah, all of our development agreements under RHID include a timeline and include price points. The developers, and I'm sure they can speak better to this, have just identified that if they have explained to us, and Mike, feel free to add anything, but product is not moving as fast as they thought it would because of the interest rates going up. And so if product has to sit longer, they're hesitant to build at quite the same pace as they had originally identified, because it doesn't make sense to have units just sitting there if they're not being purchased. So they're trying to kind of balance demand with construction timelines.
Yeah, I think the other point they made is their lender is reluctant to lend until they see more of the first phase being absorbed before they move on to the next phase.
So the argument for free market dies on this stake here.
No comment.
Well, we get caught in the middle. You know, they're arguments. Let free market decide. Let free market decide. And when it's not going that way, then it's come back. Well, what can you do to sway the free market? Just a rhetorical statement. You don't have to respond.
Philosophically, I don't have a problem with the idea of if that product's sitting on the market too long, an investment firm or any investment buyer picks it up and rents it, there's still a housing need being met. It's just a different segment of the market. I think the caveat would be, I don't like the idea of, hypothetically, if there are investors coming in and buying and then shutting out potential owner-occupied purchases. Just my 2 cents on it.
The MIH does require ownership for at least that amount. So that's going to be something that I'm sure you'll take into consideration when you look at the development agreement amendments in March, is of phase one, MIH has already said, no matter what happens in the development agreement, these 24 are owner occupied.
Got it.
But from our housing plan, how many moderate income units do we know we need to provide?
I do not know that number off the top of my head.
I think that's the number we need to keep in front of us if we're going to meet that demand within 3 years.
What I would note is a unit turning rental that was meant to be owner occupied is a little different because it can go back to being owner occupied versus something that might be like in an apartment complex or something like that. If it's in amongst other owner occupied, it really just depends on what the owner's doing with it. If they're leasing it out, but the next owner comes along and they choose not to, and they want to go back to owner occupied. So it's just something to think about.
The owner-occupied right now is really not what we're discussing. That's going to
Correct.
be on March 6th when the development agreement comes back. So, yeah.
Mr. Mayor.
We're really right now just discussing the KHITC funding, right? So.
What is the total build on this project?
Total number of units at Southview?
Yeah.
Because all the actions you've taken thus far for economic incentives are
108.
around phase one. But total build-out is 108 units.
Yeah. So got 29 up, 26 up. So is that behind schedule quite a bit?
No, it's actually ahead of schedule.
It's ahead of schedule, okay.
Yeah,
Well,
phase
what was-
one is 38 units, 26 currently out of the ground,
Yeah.
and they're ahead of
But
schedule.
they have a good amount of time left before phase one needs to be completed, so they're on schedule.
Well, I think that kind of like a car lot, you got to have inventory for people to look at, so I say build them.
Well, do you want me to yield to the applicant, Mr. Mayor?
I do have a question. It shows on here 38 units was the first phase, and I think you talked about there was 36. Where's the number? I gotta find it now. I got too many pages here. The tax credit was for 36 homes. I come up with, if you have 38 and they've already sold 5, maximum would be 33. Because you can't take into consideration homes that are sold, is that correct?
Okay, I'm trying to follow your math.
There's a portion of those structures that are townhomes.
So the townhomes are 2 units, 1 structure.
Right, but I'm talking about what's been sold. None of the townhomes, from my understanding, are on the market currently.
Correct.
So you have 38 total units, and that includes 14 single-family and 12 duplexes, which would be 2 times 12 is 24. Add those together, that's 38. So you had 38 units. On here, it says 3 are sold, 2 are under contract as of when this report was done, so that's 5. So if I take 5 from 38, the max number they could apply for would be 33. Is that correct?
As the math that we had at this time available.
But you say, on here, you say there's 36. It says on here, tax credits for 36 homes totaling $1,080,000.
We would have to, Mr. Mayor, we
but
will
I guess what I'm
verify
saying
that.
is if you have 38, you're going to subtract off anything that's sold or under contract. Would that be correct?
Correct.
Okay, that's.
If they are sold and under contract, they do not qualify.
They do not qualify. Okay.
I apologize for the math error.
No, I'm just trying to. I was trying to
course.
figure out where we came up with. How we got to the 36. So. Okay. I guess if there, we'll let the applicant speak, and then we'll see if we have any questions for them. Thank you.
Yep.
Anybody from the, applicant want to speak?
I'm Stan Byquist, representing Southview. I would hope you would support this resolution. As has been discussed, it's complicated. We are actually probably a year or more in front of the Aero development, and like you know, we run into a few issues with price increases, interest rates, et cetera. But the first thing I need to clarify, if I'm correct, we are applying for phase 2 on this. I don't believe this can be retroactive on to phase 1.
That's, and I guess, but all the numbers we have, I guess, in here shows phase 1, so.
The numbers we have received from your consultant.
Okay. Okay, I stand corrected then.
Okay, because that leads me to another question that concerns me is, we have a development agreement with a target price, and they're listed now. So, again, it sounds like what you were anticipating versus what's on the blue sheet, we're at a different point. But if we're applying for this, how does that affect your sales price?
Well, I would hope it comes down if we are.
I would hope so too. So I guess we need to.
From staff's perspective, these numbers have been gone over by Ross Vogel, were brought forward based on his clients who are Southview Estates. So if those numbers have changed based, if your consultant is saying different, that's how these were.
You prepared it as to phase 1.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
I stand corrected, sorry.
Yeah.
I see someone in the back
Staff is working with the information that we're given by the applicant.
Okay.
Somebody behind you there.
Okay, sorry.
Craig Pierce, 1308 Shoreline. From my understanding with Ross, you can't even start the project and apply for these. So that's why it's phase 2. So it has nothing to do with phase 1.
I guess with that being said, do we need to table this?
The difficulty is there's an
It's due
application deadline
February
between
17th.
now and next Monday. Is there an opportunity to get a clarification from Ross Vogel?
I don't even, the math, everything here is based on the information we were provided. And we can try and work something, but we have 2 other applications to act on, and I don't know if I feel like I can give the body enough information for them to make a decision at this point. If that's what you'd like us to do, we will,
Is this
I would be a
something
team
that
player.
can
What do you need
be
us to do?
table to the end of this meeting, and even if we have to,
Ms. Driscoll's going to be up here for the remainder of the meeting's the problem.
So the,
or a special
what are the
meeting.
numbers in the next phases?
Not that I would know off the top of my head.
I mean, at a very open-ended basis, you could make application for this program, recognizing it applies to a future phase. But I don't know, we're not in a position to tell you the number of units or do the math for you in terms of the application.
question, is granting of this award a reason to rewrite the target prices and the development agreement?
No, because this particular program has nothing to do with unit prices. It's not a requirement to get the money. It's, if you're producing, you're in a county our size, you are eligible.
Eligible for it. And I hesitate to ask this, but is this something we'd want to get the data correct and just have a special 15-minute meeting later in the week?
I don't know if Ms. Driscoll can get that information.
Well, I can tell you the other two applicants have not started construction, so
Right.
it's not the same issue.
Right.
So I believe one of the applicants has stepped out to speak to their consultant. If the body would like to temporarily postpone this item, we can act on the other and come back. What would you like to do, Mr. City Manager?
That's what I was thinking too, other than we also have a commissioner that's recused themselves with the intention of resolving this before they come and participate in the other two conversations. So I guess my suggestion would be that we just adjourn for 5 or 10 minutes, give the applicant an opportunity to see if they can gather some additional information in return.
Just to be sure we don't,
I'm
we
sorry.
want to recess.
Recess, I'm sure, yeah. I think that's a good idea. Let's recess for 10 minutes to give everybody a chance to talk if we're okay. Can I motion for that?
Right. And when we say when we say everyone to talk, the applicant's going to talk to their developer, and then
We're
we're
not
going to
gonna
talk back in
talk,
open
exactly,
session when
yeah.
we reconvene.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion second to recess for 10 minutes. We'll be back in this room at 5:26. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay,
This is
no, thank you. from our 10-minute recess, and we're waiting to see if we need. Okay, we're going to do another 5-minute recess. Let's do another 10-minute recess because I know how that goes. I'd rather do that. So, do I have a motion?
Move we recess for another 10 minutes.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to recess for 10 minutes. We will be back in here at 5:38. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, it looks like we're back in session. Ms. Driscoll,
Mr. Mayor.
what's the update?
Humbly apologize for the confusion. As I mentioned, this is a fairly new program, and it seems to be that we have a little bit of crisscross lines of communication with the applicants and staff's understanding of the program. After speaking with the applicants and getting further clarification, they would like to request City Commission support for Phase 2 of their project. It would have 36 units. At this time, due to not having some of the documents with us, they can comfortably say 36 units in Phase 2, not necessarily a breakdown of single family versus townhome. I will say from a development agreement perspective, those things are identified. So that is something that, if you wish, you can address in the future. But they know that 36 units would be in Phase 2, and they're asking for that max application, which would be $1,080,000. That's $30,000 a unit. I have looked at their resolution. It has no particular numeric citation in it. It's just the commission supporting their application for the program. So you would not need to change your resolution.
Help me here. Is our current development agreement where we set the price per unit for the entire project, or was it just for Phase 1?
Entire project.
Okay. So I guess that still gets back to the same question. Of course, right now they don't have MIH for Phase 2, correct?
Correct. They only have MIH in Phase 1, and we are speaking of Southview.
Right. So we don't even know what's still available in the MIH, and do we know how long that program runs? Because that's the art, you know. Do we know how long that MIH will be available that they could apply for in the future if they
MIH, as we discussed earlier, went from
22 to 400.
Well, it went from 400,000 an application cycle to 650,000 an application cycle, and the whole pool of funds I think went from like 4 million to 22 million annually. So, and that's something the state has dedicated. So that's beyond the ARPA dollars, and that funding cycle is currently 3. In the past, pre-COVID, it was 1, typically in August, September timeframe. But right now and for the foreseeable future, we're looking at 3. And what KHRC's told us on funding cycles is the reason they like 3 is when a developer's ready to go, they're ready to go, and typically they're not going to wait a whole year. So in order to make these tools more applicable, they've got 3 cycles.
So, anyone else questions, comments?
Yeah, this Phase 2, how many phases is there?
3? Yeah, 3 phases.
3 phases. Okay, and that price point, max price point is $225 for all 3 phases.
As I remember it, the max price point is what is in the development agreement. So the development agreement says this model, this price, this model, this price.
Okay.
They can sell for less than that, but they cannot sell for more of it. And as to Mayor Hoppeck's point, it's for that whole development, because the RHID is over the whole project.
So I guess is staff comfortable with what you worked out?
Well, and all we worked out is a clarification. The one thing that I would point out, and this is very much a technicality, but in the staff report, there's a dollar amount of $1,080,000 is the value of the KHITC application. Even though the units changed, that number didn't change because the information we were being provided had a mixture of number of units in Phase 1 and the intended units in Phase 2. So as Ms. Driscoll described, we're essentially confirming Phase 2, confirming 36 units rather than 38, and 36 times the 30,000 per unit is that $1,080,000 that was initially cited. So that doesn't require an amendment to the development agreement, but it also then doesn't attach to it any conditions of changes in price point in return for receiving this funding. I guess one other thing of note is maximum price point of $225 in the agreement, and they're selling them at $204 or $5? $204 currently.
Okay. Are programs like this, and I'm not talking about this project, but would they be a factor for us to consider when we look at length of property tax abatements? I mean,
as the states evolve
in the future,
they certainly could. It's difficult. We can negotiate the things that are in our control. It's a little difficult to factor in the rest. However, what we're learning through this process is, as Ms. Driscoll described on a prior item, the development agreement may have to be multiple scenarios of combination of tools, but it really starts with the developer as the applicant. What are your intentions? What's your budget? What's your pro forma? And then we can try to respond to that. Rolling out these programs and securing some of these funds are certainly variables that impact the overall project.
I'm not suggesting we would renegotiate the agreement we already have, but
right.
How much on the outside that you might not know about or that comes through us should be considered.
Sure.
And if our goal is to get the house on the market for the lowest price.
But, and I understand your point, and I apologize in advance. I'm going to give you a three-part answer.
Okay.
We certainly can do that going forward, and I wouldn't rule out the possibility of being able to do it with Aero Plains and with Southview with the current development agreement, as we've discussed a little bit greater detail with Aero Plains, those scenarios. The representative of the developer indicated that they would factor into their price point, but it's just a little too soon to say how this impacts their bottom line numbers. As staff, we're certainly willing to have that conversation with them, but there has to be a reopener for the development agreement in the first place, and that's somewhat in the control of the developer. They've indicated a desire to reopen for the purpose of time and construction time frame and rental units. That might be the opportunity to kind of try to factor in scenarios related to KHITC.
Well, and staff's even thought about, knowing that MIH isn't really going anywhere, that's a program we had, not really sure where the tax credit program's going, but I do think those are both worthy amendments to the housing policy and to bring forward you guys some criteria. Just so again, I think one of the challenges is, we finished the development agreement, it feels like a negotiated thing, and then these other elements come in and you made a decision based on information at that point. Well, now we're bringing more information into it. I think there has to be some kind of a kicker in there that it's like, if you want to bring these other agreements to the table, it's up to this certain point. Otherwise, and there are lots of ways to do this, but you open the development agreement back up for negotiation or things like that. It just happens it's gonna work out that way. The timing is ideally you'd have all these things happening at once, but both Aero Plains and Southview have asked to have their development agreements updated, so you are going to have kind of a bite at both those apples. But I do think in the future, it's one of the circumstances we never really thought of is, you kind of think that's done, and then these other funding sources come forward. So.
And if it was just total free market, find as many programs as you can. Get as much tax credit as you can. But we're sitting here using citizens' future tax money, as the Bank of Salina with a real low interest rate. So we do have an interest in what those other credits are, because that's less money that we have to forego of our own citizens' money to get the house on the market at the same price.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to go.
I don't need an answer to that. We'll have an opportunity, obviously, in the future, near future, to discuss that, and I can get my questions
you raise a very good point, and I may be overstepping, and I'm certainly going to put the developer on the spot, but I guess I'll invite them to come up and respond to that, indicate their willingness to work with us on the development agreement when we know more about these funding sources.
I'm Stan Byquist, and first of all, I'd like to apologize for the misinformation that was going around between city staff and our consultant and ourselves. So I'd like to apologize on everybody's behalf. Certainly, we would enter into working with you to talk this over, because all these facts, we're number one out there, and all these new facts and numbers are coming out here, and it's news to everybody.
Yeah. You certainly are on the cutting edge, and you were ahead of some of these programs that are now available. So,
right. But if you have any more questions, I'll try to answer. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this is unique in the fact that we have programs coming on the heels of already doing a development agreement and stuff, but there's not much we can do about that. So, okay, any comments or any other questions or comments from commission? If not,
I had one question for the developers. As I've driven by there, it doesn't appear there's any street lights in place. There are street lights? It looks pretty dark out there.
I will say too, streetlights are a finishing qualification for subdivision completion, which is a designation like a certificate of occupancy for a building. Engineering has a certificate of completion for a subdivision, so it wouldn't receive that without streetlights.
Thank you.
But some of the houses are occupied?
Well, phase one has streets and those types and essential services, but a lot of times things like streetlights or certain other amenities may wait till later in the subdivision just to connect and put more of those non-vital pieces in. But in order for the subdivision to complete, it would have to have streetlights. So, and I think Craig said he's got some of them in, but that's just streetlights we often get a call about. They just sometimes they lag behind a little bit.
So there is units occupied out there now?
Yeah, they have 3 that have been sold. I don't know if somebody's moved in yet. Yeah, they're saying they've moved in. And I know that because we've gotten the paperwork for MIH.
okay, any questions or comments from the public? Okay, if not, I'll bring it back to the commission for action.
Sure we get to write.
Mayor, move approval of resolution, excuse me, 238110, a letter of support for the Southview Estates LLC to submit a KHITC application.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve resolution number 23-8110, a resolution of support for the Southview Estates LLC to submit a KHITC application. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That passes 4-0. Thank you. Could someone ask Commissioner Ryan to come back, please? He doesn't know the fun he missed.
Probably went home and ate dinner.
Okay, let's move into item 7.2A.
Let me just go for it.
Yeah, I think we've already read it. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. With Commissioner Ryan joining us, I'm going to highlight a couple of the pieces related to the program just so that you're up to speed, and then we'll get into project-specific information. So I apologize for the repeating, but KHRC, which is the Housing Public Corporation through the state of Kansas, has administered or is beginning to administer a new program, the Kansas Housing Investor Tax Credit. This economic incentive program was passed through Kansas HB 2237. The economic incentive is designed to reduce the income tax liability for housing investors proportional to the awarded credit. HB 2237 has $13 million available in tax credits for qualified housing projects located in counties of less than 75,000 residents. And from the statute, depending on the population of the county, up to $35,000 per unit in credits can be earned. KHRC will allocate credits to investors, either builder developer or a qualified investor. I believe they need to reside in Kansas. Once it has been made to the project. It is anticipated that credits will be sold for equity in the project, which will help to pay for the project. Awards are no more than 1.2 million credit against a state income tax liability per project per year. So that's up to 30,000 per resident unit, up to 40 units per project per year in Salina, based on our population, those calculations I mentioned earlier from the statute. Qualified projects are elevated and determined by KHRC in accordance with Section 42 of the Federal Internal Revenue Code. As I mentioned, MIH, the last go-around, required that this investor tax credit application be applied for. With that, this is the first time it's being applied for on its own. Of the application that was submitted earlier this year, it was not awarded. So we have not been awarded this even with the MIH application that we put forward. Let's see. There will be 3 funding cycles for this particular program. Nothing prohibits a developer from applying if they had not gotten it before. So they have 3 goes at it a year that they can try and apply. This particular application will be due February 17th, 2023. As a reminder, this is different than MIH. We're not administering this grant. So there's no reporting to us, there's no financial relationship between us submitting receipts or anything to the state. This is them applying, but they do need a resolution of support from the governing body in order to apply. There are 2 projects that are requesting your support. The first one is for Building Kansas LLC, or Aero Plains. That's the one we spoke about regarding the MIH earlier. This is 53.2 acre parcel north of Schilling Road and east of Centennial Road. The project's total build out is 169 lots, each with 2 units. They're townhomes per lot. Therefore, the total number of units at build out will be 338. The total project is being built in 2 phases, with phase 1 of 75 lots or 150 units, and phase 2 is 94 lots with 188 units. The Aero Plains project is waiting to pull permits, as KHRC prefers no construction begin before the project can be evaluated for a grant committee. So that's particularly dealing with infrastructure construction and things like that. Aero Plains has requested that the city apply for the 2023 MIH funds, as I mentioned, under the ARPA component. This current KHITC, or the income tax credit request, is a resolution of support. They are seeking tax credits for 40 homes with Aero Plains Phase 1 at a maximum ask of $30,000 per unit. So their total ask for the 2023 KHITC is $1.2 million. The other request is being made for Sean and Jessica Kindlesbarger. They are doing a Brock Road townhome project. They are intending to apply for $540,000 in KHITC dollars. This project is passed through the Planning Commission, whereby the conditional use permit has been approved. On August 16th of 2022, the applicants have proposed to construct townhome-style dwellings on vacant property at the west end of Brock Road around the cul-de-sac. In total, the proposed plan shows 4 separate buildings consisting of 18 total dwellings with 36 feet of off-street parking spaces, including an attached single-car garage for each unit. The zoning administrator has determined that these are single-family attached dwellings not exceeding more than 6 units per building and not a multifamily apartment complex. Construction and permitting have not yet begun. This project does not qualify for any local incentives based on location or size, if the project, and therefore has no pending requests for other economic incentives, nor a development agreement. This current KHITC request is a resolution of support, as noted earlier, for all 18 townhomes on the Brock Road townhome development for a maximum of $30,000 per unit. There is no financial match for these requests. It is simply a resolution of support. The city will not be obligated to any future monetary expenditures or any dedicated staff time by supporting this resolution. You then have before you two different actions in this case. You have one for Aero Plains, which is Resolution 238109, and you have one for the Brock Street Townhomes, which is Resolution 23-8111. If the body approves that resolution is the first option. Second option is to approve the resolutions with amendments or further direction. 3 would be to postpone consideration on these resolutions, or one resolution versus the other, and provide additional staff direction. And lastly, 4 would be to deny one or both of those resolutions before you. Staff is available for any technical questions.
Do we have any questions, or would we like to hear from the applicants first?
I have, I assume this went through planning?
The Brock Townhomes?
Yeah.
Yes, it has been,
Okay.
and it doesn't need to be platted or anything, it just needed zoning, so it's been given a conditional use permit.
Okay. Well, as I look at the map here, I see the one-way in. Has that been covered?
It is at the end of a cul-de-sac, and the cul-de-sac is large enough. It's not its own subdivision, it's only 18 units, so it's at the end of a road that's got a large cul-de-sac that was designed to handle fire truck turnaround.
Okay.
Any questions, technical questions for Mr. Driscoll? Now, we have a development agreement with Aero Plains in place. Again, I guess I'd hear from the applicant about if they're awarded this, how this will affect price points, if any?
As a reminder, so Aero Plains is the one that we submitted our MIH for this last go-around, and they were denied.
Right.
This tax credit application also went and was not approved. So this would be the second go for Aero Plains.
So, and I guess this may be for the developer, but the development agreement we approved as far as price points did not, at that point, we did not take into consideration MIH or this.
Correct.
Correct. Okay. Mr. Hoppy. And could you, if you remember what those price points are, could you remind us, please?
250 in that range.
215?
250.
250.
Yes.
Okay.
Gary Hobby, Salina, Kansas, here on the Aero Plains subdivision and the income tax credits that we would very much appreciate using on our project. The main goal for these tax credits is to very similar to the MIH, and that is to buy down the cost of the house for the eventual owner of the property itself. So we plan on putting this towards the actual purchase price of the homes. To go back to your statement or question earlier about the Lisburg project, and yes, there are some rental units in the Lisburg project, and it was designed that way in the very beginning, but now they've gone to strictly owner-occupied homes in order to comply with the MIH grant that was also awarded down there. So yes, these tax credits are something to be very beneficial to the owner of the property once they've been completed.
Do we have any other commissioners have a question for the developer? Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I guess since we really haven't heard much about the Brock Road townhomes, I don't know if the developer would care to share with us what that project looks like. And I guess a question I had from reading that, are these going to be sold or are they going to be rentals?
Jessica Kindlesbarger here on behalf of the Brock Townhomes. Those will be used as rentals. Again, 18 units, 3-bed, 2.5 bath, 1 car, 2-story. Honestly, if we were awarded these tax credits, would greatly change what I could do in the way of rents. Currently projecting, if I could ideally keep those rents at $1,500, $1,600 a month, that would be great. If we weren't awarded this, we'd be looking at probably an upwards of $1,800 just to get the cash flow where we need to be. Yeah.
In this property, all the infrastructure's in place and everything, correct?
Infrastructure's in place. Timeline on this, we could really turn this around. Once we were ready to go, we could have units up on the market within 6 months, and ideally the project would be complete in 9. So it'd just be a single phase. Yeah.
Do you have any price points on the rental rates?
Yeah, right now we're looking at having to go in upwards of $1,800 a month to make that cash flow. But should we be able to get awarded this tax credit, ideally, we'd like to keep them around 15. I work in real estate. I can tell you, as you all know, daily I get phone calls for rentals, and daily in this price point. I mean, there's nothing out there. I think once we exceed that $16.50 a month in rent, it becomes much more difficult for tenants to afford. Any other questions?
Thank you. And obviously, this project, like different than the others, allows both either owner-occupied or rental properties, correct?
Yeah, there is no restriction in this particular case, rather based on owner or rental.
Oh, and I like the fact that this one's infill and they're not receiving any of the other incentives, so. And we do not prioritize these. We just send them in and the state, I guess, prioritizes them.
Yeah,
Correct?
they just want to know, is there support for it?
Okay. Any questions, comments, anybody?
I like the last one. It's free market. If you can get it, go for it.
Okay, any questions or comments from the public? Okay, if not, we have two resolutions to potentially act on.
Mayor, I move to approve resolution number 23-8109, resolution in support of Building Kansas LLC to submit a KHITC application.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve resolution number 23-8109, a resolution in support of Building Kansas LLC to submit a KHITC application. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That passes 5-0. We have a motion on 7.2C.
Mayor, I move we approve resolution number 238111, resolution to support for Sean Kindlesparker to submit a KHITC application.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve resolution number 23-8111, a resolution of support for Sean Kindlesbarger to submit a KHITC application. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? That also passes 5-0. Thank you, everyone, for your time this evening on those. That will lead us to other business. Do I have a look at other commissioners or city staff? Do we have anything else to come before us this evening?
Not from staff.
Okay. With that, that brings us to Citizens Forum. Again, this is an opportunity for individuals to comment on something that was not on the agenda. We ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes. Is there?
Richard Humphrey II, Salina, Kansas. Thank you for allowing the people the time to speak. Do appreciate it. Before my concern, just two reminders: business efficacy and penalties with the new incorporated entity, and also that moderate housing and affordable housing are not the same, such as minimum wage is not a living wage. Anyways, moving forward, goals, until conversation late otherwise, understand your goals are to protect businesses and police. Mine are set for people and just beliefs. The future conversation we're having are the public restrooms, where winter shelters, basic needs, it will end soon, but the people will not. They'll still be on the streets. So to respect the businesses and reduce impact of police, if the people want to move forward and carry out a strategic plan on how to help address that, we would ask just for appropriate counsel moving forward. I've done my part. I like to use the Maslow's theory of basic needs to just incorporate conversation there. And I did a price check of $250 per porta potty for those that are willing to confront these issues moving forward. Besides that, I'm having a great time with my community capstone project. I do appreciate everything you guys are doing, and moving forward, things are good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ben Winholt, Salina. On February 6th, Salina 311 ran a story about the new tennis complex. I know this is getting old, but there is a lot of questions and a lot of things that hopefully the city manager, since he's been in contact with them, can answer. It's going to open on February 27th, so they got their way. They left it closed all winter, so nobody could get on it. That's just my opinion. They're saying in the story that half of the courts, 1 through 6, are going to be pay to play, $5 an hour to play on these courts. Courts 7 through 12 are open to the public. Now, staff is going to be on site, according to this story. They're going to be on site from on Monday through Thursday, 3 to 7 p.m., and on Friday from 3 to 5:30. Yet the complex is open by a keypad during the hours that the parks are open. Evidently, they're going with Sunset and Bill Burke hours because their schedule has, as far as getting the courts, is from 5 in the morning till 10:30 at night. What I don't understand is, and they said the keypads, basically, once they're open, it will be, you can reserve a court or you can just walk on. They're going to have how to get in the keypads going to be right there on the gate. So basically, I think this evidently is a lock that is after hours to lock them down. What I can't figure out is how is anything going to be controlled as far as pay to play, getting on that court, which I think they have keypads on each one, versus if staff is only there from 3 to 7 or from 3 to 5:30 during the week and not there on the weekends unless there's a special event. Also, if you go to their website as far as book a court, courts 7 through 12 are supposedly open to the public, yet they have those earmarked already for Kansas Wesleyan for their practices, and their Kansas Wesleyan tournaments are using those 6 courts and not 1 through 6. So, and as they've already said, if the courts are not available, you can't walk on. The second question I got, is this was brought up at the study session when SDA was here, of who's paying for the electricity and the water. Mike, can you answer that? Is the city going to be on the hook for paying for the water bills and the electric bills?
I need to go back and check the operation agreement, but I think the STA is accepting responsibility for that.
Because they didn't know at the time, basically, who was going to pay for it.
Yeah, we have an operation agreement that speaks to a lot of the questions that you're raising, so.
It would be great, and Commissioner Lombine brought this up at a few times that I've come up here ago, that it would be great if you get STA here to explain before this opens up exactly how all of this is going to work, because there's just way too many variables that are not in line for public use.
And it might be, we're past our 3 minutes, it might be beneficial if you put those into a email form or something. I think we've dealt that before. That way we can forward those on and we can kind of address them. I mean, you've asked a lot of questions here, and I think that'd be beneficial if you could do that for us.
Okay.
I think that'd be.
Okay. And maybe I can reach out to STA by myself too, because I've already done that once.
Yeah.
So
that'd be beneficial. So.
Okay.
Okay.
Well,
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay. With that, I'll
Move we adjourn.
Got a motion, a second to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. Thank you.